Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to tournament poker strategy. And now, here are your hosts, Ron Fezbuddy and Killingbird. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Killingbird here with you, as always, joined by my co-host, Ron Fezbuddy. What's up, my friend?
Sup?
Long time no speak.
That's my new thing. I'm gonna just say sup.
I don't like it. I disapprove.
I don't like it. All right. I'll go back to my nerd persona. What's up, man?
I really wish Big Dog was here to make fun of you for saying that.
I know. Well, it's been a while since we podcast, so give me a break, okay? I didn't know what to say. I forgot how to say hello.
That means you should have had time to come up with a better tagline.
Yeah. Okay.
Or catchphrase.
Fair enough. Okay. All right. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a long time. Since the last call, I've sold everything I've owned, driven across the country, and moved to Las Vegas, so things are going crazy.
It's nuts. Fun,
yeah.
But I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a last-second decision, and it happened all very fast, but been enjoying it, and now it's starting to cool down a little bit here, too, which is actually kind of a nice transitional change, so yeah, it's cool.
It's not 118 degrees anymore?
No, but it still gets up to about 105, but at night it actually cools off pretty nice. So
right.
We're getting
94. 94 in New York City today. So I can sympathize. But okay, all right. No one's listening to this for the weather report. So
no, this is true. So this is gonna be a cool podcast. I'm looking forward to doing this today. A lot of our podcasts just feature our fellow TPE dudes or pros or whatever.
I prefer brethren.
our TPE brethren. Yes,
Yeah.
I like that. It's actually, I was trying to think today. I didn't go back and look at the list, but I was trying to think of how many times we've had any sort of quote-unquote non-TPE pro on the show. And I think the only one I could think of was Rob Salaburu. I don't know if you could think of any offhand. But...
I remember Rob, and we had Pierre on. TPE member, not
right.
pro, but
yep.
Hey, the guy's probably won more money in poker than me the last year, so
he definitely won more than me. I know that.
I love your tweet on how your bankroll challenge is going. 5,000 to 0, and you're halfway there.
I'm a little closer after this past weekend, so. So this is going to be fun. Some people will recognize our guest from possibly some other podcasts or from some World Series of Poker coverage. He is a professional comedian and a professional poker player, so it should be a cool combo to get into and dig into. His name is Clayton Fletcher. What's up, Clayton? How you doing, brother?
Sup?
Oh, no.
Hey, wait. That's mine, man. You can't steal that.
I like it. I'm going to use it. Thanks,
fantastic.
I'm a huge fan. I've listened to every single episode you guys have ever put out, and it's just really awesome to be on the show. The last one you guys did, you were saying how you're going to start doing this every week or two. So here we are 6 months later. Good job.
We're killing it. We had such good intentions, you know.
Yes, that's the best intentions. You can blame me. I am traveling like crazy for work, and it's just really hard to sit down and do anything other than work right now. So my bad. You can all vent your anger at me. You can tweet at me angry stuff. I take it and I deserve it.
That's fair.
The fans want the podcast, man. They want it.
I know. Well, we're here. Let's not squander our opportunity complaining, Clayton.
Yeah, I like that. I like that plan. So likewise, by the way, to have you on the show. I know that Diego and I have both heard you on the Thinking Poker podcast. Always enjoyed those. And
Yep.
And you've had some nice runs in the World Series, so it's kind of perfect to get to chat. I know later on in the show we're going to talk about a couple of hands that you played in this year's main event, where you finished 28th place. I'm afraid to ask, but what was the pay jump from 28th to 27th?
It was about $50,000, but the pay jump from 28th to first was about $8 million.
So that one hurt more.
Yeah.
Way to make our guests feel good and comfortable, Derek. But making him feel about his lost opportunities.
Hey, he's heard the show. He knows how this goes.
Yeah, exactly.
we just beat up on each other at every possible moment.
Yeah.
So before we get into too much of the poker stuff, I guess let's talk a little bit about your background, kind of where you grew up, where you came from, how you got into poker, and then we'll kind of talk about the comedy stuff a little bit as well.
Okay, cool. So I grew up in Baltimore. Shout out to Andrew Brokus, my fellow Marylander, host of the Thinking Poker podcast, and our mutual friend. Yep. So growing up in Baltimore, I had an unusual childhood. My father was a professional jazz musician, and my mother was an expert in a lot of games, and one of them was 7-card stud. She used to have a home game. So upstairs we had like the colorful characters you might find in a home poker game in downtown Baltimore, and then downstairs you have the colorful characters you might find in the jazz club.
Nice.
So
wow, what an interesting picture that you're painting there. I just see like a '60s movie. Well, I guess I didn't mean to imply you're that old, but I just see this panoramic view of going from one scene to the other. These crazy, colorful things going on. It's a really interesting upbringing you must have had.
Yeah, my brothers and I, we were kind of just in the middle of it. We're all around the same age. My parents cranked out 3 kids in 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, really crazy. 3 boys, and I'm the middle one. And we were competitive, So we would sit around the table, not just playing 7-card stud, which, by the way, my mother would check raise my allowance. By far the best poker player in the house, and just because you were her son doesn't mean she was going to let you win.
Right.
You have to earn the value of $1 one way or the other.
Awesome.
But and we play other games too, like Neilborn and cribbage, any kind of game you could play. But we all sort of developed a love for playing games and then for discussing strategies afterwards, and sometimes even during the game. I can remember playing chess against my older brother, and he was really good at chess. And he would stop me and say, "Why'd you do that? Go back, take that back. Don't you see that you're exposing your bishop to, whatever?" And so that just was kind of a part of my life from a very young age, was just kind of delving into game theory as it related to, at the time, 7-card stud. But then we got into other forms of poker as well. And by the time I was 21, I was ready to join my mom on my first trip to Atlantic City, which at the time was the closest gambling to Baltimore, the closest casino. And I remember it was $1, $3 spread limit, 7-card stud.
With your mom. It's amazing.
Well, my mom played a much bigger game, but I played. And I got my feet wet that way. I remember like it was yesterday, because it was my first time I'd ever been to Atlantic City, and I won $112, and I just thought I was.
Yeah. Never lost since then, right? First time winning, right?
Oh yeah. I'm like one of those free rollers that never even put a dime on Poker Stars.
Yeah.
Not quite, but sounds good.
Yeah. Of course. How did you get connected to Andrew and the Thinking Poker podcast? I've listened to you on that a couple of times. I really enjoyed your appearances and the stories and you jamming with Andrew on hands. How did you get connected to Andrew?
Oh yeah. Thanks, by the way. I appreciate it. Andrew, I mentioned Thinking Poker on another podcast. I was on a comedy show called Dennis Has a Podcast.
Yeah.
He was talking to me about the podcast that I listened to, and I told him that you ask 50 comedians, I'm the only one who's going to give you these answers. And I listed your podcast and Andrew's podcast, and somebody told him, there's some comedian that's telling people in the comedy world about your podcast, and he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I listened to that. Dennis Has a Podcast. Do you want to be a guest on my podcast? I think your story is interesting."
Yeah.
And that 4 years ago, I don't know. It's been a long time. Might have been longer. And then that same year, after I first did I've done his show 4 times. And after the first one, we met up in Vegas, and I finally got to like actually meet him in person, along with Nate Mavis, the co-host. And yeah, we just kind of hit it off and found we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Andrew likes teaching, I like teaching.
Yep.
Yeah, so and we just kind of have similar backgrounds, both being from Maryland and everything. So we were instant friends, and everything was going very smoothly until Carlos knocked me off the top spot, and now Andrew doesn't.
Yeah, and we birthed Carlos into this world, didn't we?
Yeah,
Did we
sure.
take credit for that? not Derek and I personally, but we having an odd family, a really weird visual. But no, yeah. So, but he's run with Andrew, which is awesome because Carlos is an awesome guy.
Yeah, I love him. He's awesome.
So I'm pretty sure I heard your first appearance because I recall that sort of you getting acquainted and that story, and I'm pretty sure I heard your last appearance because I heard you talking about the main. How has your game changed and progressed? Because it seems like you've definitely I wouldn't call you an amateur back the first time I heard, but it sounds like you're definitely more of a pro now than you were then. Is that true? I mean, how long have you been playing? What's your split between the comedy and the poker? Is it equal, or how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as dual careers or a comedian who plays poker on the side?
Yeah, I feel like I'm both a professional comedian and a professional poker player. But the only thing I mean by that is that in most of the games that I sit down, I'm a favorite. I make about half my income from poker, but I'm certainly trying to sit with the German guys that travel together and play all the super high rollers. I don't have any delusions about exactly where my skill level is. But I would agree with you that listening to earlier appearances on the podcast with Andrew from many years ago to now, my game has gotten much sharper. I credit that to just, talking poker with players that are much better than I am and making friends, people that I can really learn from, including Andrew. And also I have to give a shout out to my other coach, Anton Wigg, who is a name you guys might not know, but he's a great, great player from Sweden. And I actually spend quite a bit of time in Sweden. And whenever I do, I get together with Anton and we talk about poker and stuff. And he's a great guy and a great poker player himself.
Nice.
That's great. Now, was Andrew's sort of being introduced into Andrew's podcast sort of your entree into more of the poker world? Because I agree with you. Once you get in, once you make poker friends and you hang around poker people and you go back after a tournament and there's 4 or 5 people that you could talk to about the hands, it does change. It just changes a lot, right? It changes. It really levels you up. Is that how that started for you, or were you already getting into it around that time?
I think I was getting into it a little bit before that. I guess about 8 years ago, I went to Melbourne, Australia for the Aussie Millions. I had won a seat.
Oh, okay.
I had won a seat on Cake Poker. And
oh God, I remember Cake, yeah.
Yeah, so I won this like $30 satellite and won this huge package to the Aussie Millions. And when I was out there, I actually booked a gig at a comedy club as well. So I had met Tony Dunst once or twice before, and then he and I ended up at the same table in the Aussie Millions. And I told him, hey, by the way, tomorrow night I have a comedy show. And Tony came to that show and brought like 10 or 12 like A-list poker pros. That's actually where I met Anton, along with Baran and Boston and like all the American guys that were in Australia for the Aussie Millions. Like all of these like, top. How many poker players could I just have to say their first name and you know exactly who I'm talking.
Yeah. I remember a story like that from the first World Series after we started TPE, and the pros were our entree into that world. And I remember just going to a dinner break, some sushi place, and it was like all of the online wizards of 2010 were there, right? And they were just like, I was sitting around, I was like, wow. First of all, they're all 15 years younger than me, and I'm like, wow, these are like the names on 2+2, and they're all just people putting raw fish in their mouth. This is really interesting.
We had like a high stakes kickball game with let's see, like I mean, like Mormon was there,
Yeah.
Jason Kuhn. Like, I mean, I could go on and on. Pretty much everybody that you would like your fantasy team of poker. Maybe not your fantasy team of kickball.
Yeah.
Maybe Jason Kuhn is on that team, but nobody
Yeah,
else.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he crushed the ball.
Yeah, but some of these other guys, it was a little bit sad,
Yeah.
myself included.
Right.
I didn't belong in any athletic endeavor, but yeah, we had a great time, and then I kind of remained friends with a few of those guys over the years, and kind of got me into more. I mean, I don't want to say like the fraternity, but I felt like I had a little bit more just knowledge of how the top players really think. Aside from just listening to interviews with them and stuff, but being able to like pick the brains of some of the really, really high level pros kind of changed my life because I started thinking about the game differently just from those conversations. And then would change my approach when I sat down to play.
Yeah. Great.
Very cool. So I'm kind of curious. At some point in your life, obviously, you had to make some decision about a career. So was there literally a time where you were like, I'm going to be a poker player and a comedian, or did you say, well, I'm going to be a comedian and I'll just kind of play poker on the side, or
Yeah.
or vice versa? Like, it's obviously one of them is a unique career, and to have them both as a career is obviously incredibly unique. So I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of just happened. I I was trying to get my comedy career started. Before that, I was a musician. I was also an actor. And I had just kind of gotten into comedy, and I was just trying to get my feet wet in comedy. And I was only getting like one or two nights a week where I was finding opportunities to perform. And I said, unless I can make some money, I'm going to have to like start auditioning for acting roles again or figure out another way to make some money. So, and I really didn't want to do that. I was kind of disenchanted with acting, and I was really wanting to get into comedy. So I said, well, maybe I can just go to Atlantic City and, once or twice a week and play in some cash games, maybe some of the small tournaments there, and see if I can, try to pay my rent that way. So I would jump on the bus from New York to Atlantic City, not even have a hotel room half the time, and just play all night and take the early bus back in the morning. And that was going fine. And one day I actually met a comedy club owner at the poker table. So I was making this guy laugh at the time. I remember we were playing a $60 tournament at the Taj Mahal. Rest in peace, Taj Mahal. Uh,
Wow, that's
so
a flashback.
Yeah, really.
and this guy next to me says, "Hey man, you're pretty funny, you know that?" I was like, "Oh, thanks. I'm actually an aspiring comedian." And he said, "Well, allow me to introduce myself. My name's Al Martin, and I own Broadway Comedy Club in New York City." And I said, "Oh, hi, Mr. Martin. I'm Clayton Fletcher. I've heard of you, and I've always wanted to meet you." I ended up spending, the next 10 hours playing at the table with him, and we became friends. And it was funny because sometimes you think that it's who you know, but you never know where you're going to meet somebody that can actually end up helping you. And yeah, he and I have been friends ever since. I work at his clubs, and he really helped me a lot with my comedy. And I actually taught him a lot about poker. So
Yeah.
we have a mutually beneficial relationship going on 8 years now.
That's awesome. And so, I know this is the poker podcast, and we'll get to the poker in a second. But your unique story is intriguing. And I think people are interested in it. Would be interested in it. I mean, what's it like being a comedian? I know that's a very broad question, but I've listened to a ton of podcasts from comedians, so I got a little bit of the inside. But you're living the life. I mean, what is it like to write sets and work out material? How does that? Is it much like if you listen to say like WTF or like a Pete Holmes podcast, or even like the Nerdist, where they're kind of breaking down the comedy process? Can you give us a feel for what that's like being a comedian?
Yeah, sure. I actually think it's not that different from being a tournament player because we both have to spend a lot of time away from the job site,
Yeah.
be that felt or the stage, kind of thinking about what we're going to do the next time we have to perform. And so it's very similar to the way we discuss hands. I'll sit down with other comedians. Actually, I'm friends with Pete Holmes, or I should say I was friends with Pete Holmes. He and I started in stand-up around the same time many years ago. And he was someone that I used to talk to about jokes, kind of very similar to the way poker players discuss hands. Comedians might get for coffee and say, man, I have this bit I've been working on. You know, it's about my shoes come in sizes that are 11 and a half, 12, 12 and a half, and I can't make it work. What do you think about this joke? And then the other guy will say, well, why don't you try it like this? And, no, I have an idea that might make it funnier. And, you know, we kind of bounce ideas off of each other.
Right.
Like that. It's very, very similar to what poker players do. But, you know, I kind of need both in my life because I don't think that I would be a happy person if I just played poker full time. And I know that I wouldn't be a happy person if I only did comedy.
Right.
I need to two separate things to obsess about in order.
I know the feel. I know exactly what you mean. It's nice to. Yeah, I know exactly. I love what I love about poker is that you know, since it's not my full-time job, when I do get to go do it, especially the tournament format, I mean, I have to shut everything else off. I can't be in my head around daily work stuff. It's just you can't do. You really become completely absorbed into the moment in poker, and I feel like it helps me with my work because I can truly sort of break for a little while and allow sort of like, you know, divergence from all the things I've been working on to kind of help me converge later on to newer ideas. So I completely understand needing the two to be present in your life.
Yeah, and I guess for me the dream job might be something like what Joe Stapleton has. I'm sure most of the listeners know who he is, but he's a stand-up comedian. He's also done a lot of comedy writing and improvisational comedy. And, you know, he does on camera for ESPN and Poker Stars, where, you know, it's kind of expected that he's going to be funny. I kind of got my feet wet in that a little bit. I got to do some commentary for Poker Central on the Twitch stream that they did during the World Series this summer. And that was
nice.
A little taste of, wow, just really able to combine my two talents together in a meaningful way. So, yeah, that's kind of what I would love to get into if I could just write my own story. Other than, you know, instead of getting 28th, I got first.
So before we move on to poker, then, if anyone listening wants to hear some of your stuff, where's the best place to find some of your work or sample some of your work?
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to hear me do poker commentary with David Tuckman, you can go on twitch.tv/Poker Central, and you can watch all of the final tables. We did the we did the Millionaire Maker together. We also did the 50K high roller at the end.
Oh, nice.
Going same time as the main event. So I think a lot of people missed what we were doing, but it was a stacked final table.
Yeah.
With a lot of the top names.
Wait, was the Millionaire Maker the one with the guy who celebrated prematurely? Was that the one? Was that?
Yes, it was. And
you're the call on it?
I did not do that one. I did I'm telling the listeners the wrong one to watch, but you're right. That was the Millionaire Maker where the guy gets really excited and then up on like ESPN, like Sports Center that night because that guy just the premature celebration.
Man.
Yeah. Actually, at this moment, I can't think of what the other tournament that we did together was. Oh, you know what it was? It was the little one for one drop.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah, because we kept talking about the charity and everything. So,
nice.
Yeah, check that out, and you can watch us do the table. Now, I met Joe Stapleton. I got a great story how I met him. So, in New York, I have a show that I run at one of the comedy clubs, and I'm kind of in charge of the show. And I get this email out of the blue. Now, I knew Joe Stapleton's name because way back in the day, I used to listen to Poker Road Radio like it was my job.
Two Jacks?
I love Two Jacks. I love all the shows on Poker Road. I listen to every single thing they put out. Cash Plays with Bart Hanson.
Yep. I love that too. Wow.
Total junkie. So I get this random email. Hey, I'm a comedian from LA. I'm going to be in New York for the weekend, and somebody told me that you have a show. I was wondering if I could get a 5-minute spot. Please let me know if there's any way this can happen. Sincerely, Joe Stapleton. And I was like, is this the same Joe Stapleton from Poker Road? And he's like, yeah. I was like, there is nobody in New York that could have been a better person for you to email.
Right, absolutely right.
I hooked him up. I got him as many spots as I could. I was like, I just want to thank you for entertaining me for hours and hours and hours when I was kind of learning the game. So, yeah, so now he and I are really good friends. Just saw him the other day because I'm in LA now and he lives there too. So, yeah, so
That's great.
That's kind of a fun thing that just kind of happened. You think poker's like this isolated world where everybody's just kind of, it's every man for himself, every woman for herself. But the truth is, we all are more connected than we might realize.
Yep.
Yeah, very true. It's like, especially the sort of, it's it's not 6 degrees of separation. It's usually literally 1. Like if you know somebody, they probably know somebody.
Definitely, and we all know Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carlos is the Kevin Bacon of the poker world.
Yeah.
Wow, that'd be a fun game to play on the podcast.
It really would be. New podcast.
There we go.
New podcast.
Carlos.
Oh, that's funny. So I know we want to get talking about your World Series appearance because I want to kind of ask you about just what that's like being that deep and everything. But I did have one more question on the comedy side, just because the Pete Holmes thing came up, and I love that show Crashing.
Yeah.
How much of that is accurate in the sense of like when you're coming up, you have to stand on the corner handing out flyers and stuff to earn your spot on the stage?
Oh yeah, in New York, stage time is so hard to get, and it's literally the only way to get really good at comedy is to get stage time. And there are just, for every one spot, there are 20 or 30 or maybe even 40 comics trying to get that one spot. So when you're first starting out, if you're not an established professional, you have to wash the dishes or hand out flyers, or I mean, it's 100% true. In fact, on TV, it actually might be not as hard as it is in real life. Watching the show, yeah, I mean, we know comics that will basically bend over backwards just to get an opportunity to perform for free for 5 minutes for 3 people in the audience.
Right.
So, it's everybody says it's the hardest profession in the world is trying to make it in show business, but I think within show business, comedy is the hardest.
Yeah.
All of the different types of entertainment, and I've done a lot of them. I was a musician and actor. I've done a lot of different things within the performing arts, and comedy is the hardest to kind of get started. But what's great about it is, and why we fall in love with it, is you get to tell the truth and be yourself. And I mean, of course, it's an exaggerated version of myself, but there's something really satisfying to be able to perform, but not have to like wear a costume, and act,
right,
and have. So
and it's kind of like that whole thing of being your own boss and all that.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah, they just tell me what time to be there and what time to get off. And as long as everybody laughs, they don't care what happens in between.
It's classic. All right, the main event. So Diego and I have both, of course, had the opportunity to play the main event, and we always talk about, and everybody who talks about the main event describes it the same way. It's unlike any other poker tournament. It's the greatest tournament in the world. It's what every player aspires to play in. How stoked do you get every summer when it's time to play the World Series of Poker main event?
I would never miss it for anything. It's the one thing that I probably look forward to the most all year. And I do a lot of really fun comedy shows. I get to go to a lot of cool places, take a lot of great trips, and hang out with famous people sometimes, and all the good cool things that happen in my life. My favorite thing is the main event. So I cannot overstate how much I look forward to it. I'm like a little kid on Christmas morning, and I've never lost. I've played it 9 times. 3 years ago, I got 96 plays, so I finished in the top 100. And back then, I never thought that I would get that far again. So to be able to get there again this summer and actually top my previous high was something that I don't think the odds of it happening were very good, and I actually can't really believe that it happened, to be honest.
Did you go an extra day this time around, or was it just that
Yeah.
you? Yeah, you did, right? You went an extra day. Yeah. Wow.
I was the last person to bust on day 6.
They say, okay. Wow. That is far.
I busted right before dinner on day 5.
Okay.
So there's a
Got
big
it.
difference. There's a lot more poker to
Yeah.
play, and when it gets down, when you're looking around, there's only 4 tables left. You're like, holy, this is happening.
Yeah.
This is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you obviously people are kind of aware of this, but when you start, you look around and you're like, there are so many effing people to go through here,
Yeah.
and this is just my day. Like this is my starting day. There's 2 other starting days. The idea of making it down to 4 tables is unfathomable to me in the main event. Like it just like looking around and going, oh, it's one of us that's going to be $8 million richer. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This year was almost 9 million. It was 8.8.
Wow.
So closer to 9 million. And just realizing that the opportunity was there, and yet it's really far away, because at the end of day 6, they get down to 3 tables, and then there's still like 3 more whole days to play.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're close, but you're not as close as you might think. So,
Do you
but yeah,
do you
in the zone.
do you think separating variance from it and separating well, no, so just as far as I'm curious, like, okay, separating variance is separating your progression of skill from your 96th place to your 28th place. Do you think that your experience going deep once made a difference for you in going deep the second time? Were you able to draw on that? Do you think it had any impact? Did it help you?
I think it did, in the sense that 3 years ago, I was not as aware as I was this year of how the lights, camera, action would affect my opponent. But having seen it already a few years ago, I was more prepared for their reaction than I was 3 years ago. If you know what I'm trying to say, it's just like, for me, I don't think it affected me, because honestly, I'm used to attention, and I wasn't that thrown off by. I've had cameras in my face before and stuff like that, just from my other career, so it didn't really throw me off. But I remember seeing some very strange play just because there were cameras around back then, so that helped me prepare for what I might see this summer.
Fascinating. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious. So we didn't really do a post World Series show this year, so we didn't get a lot of time to talk about sort of the characters who made the final table and what we thought of them, what the public thought of them. Did you? I assume you played with a bunch of those guys, or several of the guys from the final table. I think I would argue, and it seems like most people did, that maybe it wasn't as tough of a final table this year. But you obviously played with some of these guys, so do you have thoughts on that?
Definitely. I played with, I think, everyone who made the final table at some point I had played with. And I saw some very unusual poker on day 6. And I was looking around like, wow, this is, at my day 6 table, there was Joe Cata and eventual winner, John Sin, and myself. And then the other players at the table, by and large, seemed like they just came from like outer space. But these like video game characters, it felt like I was in a poker video game or something. I mean, it was wild. I mean, some of the, like my friends at home were watching the chip counts and was like, oh, Clayton has 12 million. And then 5 minutes later, Clayton has 5 million. And then Clayton has 14 million. It was like we were playing these huge pots where, it was pretty much wild. It felt like a wild home game where everyone was drunk or something. But that wasn't, no one was drunk. They were just, that's how they play poker. It was just crazy. every pot at my day 6 table was huge. It seemed.
Wow.
Do you think that represents some sort of adjustment to the current sort of game theory optimal, blanket across strategy? Do you think people are adjusting and changing their game now that people are playing a similar way for a couple of years now, or is it just, do you think, small sample, the way people are playing?
My perception of what was going on was that many of my opponents didn't have a ton of tournament experience.
Okay.
And they didn't know that you're allowed to fold and just let the other guy have it, and that you're supposed to get bluffed sometimes. And they seem to be trying to prove, like, everyone seemed to be trying to get the title of King of the Hill.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a very unusual situation. No one seemed to be affected by the reality of just the sheer amount of money that was at risk or at stake. And so you just had to kind of buckle up. Actually, John Sin and I, coming back from dinner on day 6, we happened to be in the same elevator, and we had some, just a brief elevator conversation, like, wow, what a table we have. And he's like, yeah, just buckle your seatbelt or something like that. And
yeah, because he went deep previously too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, he had finished, I think, told me in 11th place, maybe last year even. So he had been there before as well. So he and I were kind of and of course Joe Cat. The three of us seemed to be the ones that seemed to have the most composure, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I've made some mistakes. But you know what? Every time I play poker, I make lots of mistakes. I do consider myself a serious player. I think of myself as a professional, but I don't think that means that I play perfect poker. I mean, every time I sit down and play, I mess some stuff up. And, just this time, some of the hands that I would play differently were shown on either ESPN or on Poker Go. And so, and then of course the whole point of putting something on television is so people can talk about it. But unfortunately for me, I'm from the comedy world, so I have a thick skin already.
Yeah.
So I can take criticism that I got for the hands that I maybe didn't play optimally. But what I did is I played my best, and it was, again, good enough to get me into the top 100. But yeah, John Sin was the short stack at my table for almost the whole day. And if you watch the day 6 on Poker Go, you'll see, like, he was always short. He had one move. He waited and went all in, and then everybody folded, and then waited and then went all in. And when he finally got chips, he bluffed them off. And then he came all the way back again, and obviously ended up winning the title. But it felt more than in any other previous year that it truly was anyone's game.
Right. Awesome. Well, why don't we talk about a couple of hands from the tournament? I think you said you had one or two that you thought was worth talking from a strategy perspective.
Definitely.
You want to set them up for us?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do so. And I want to say before I start, I've been appearing on a lot of poker podcasts since the main event, and I made a point of choosing hands that I haven't talked about anywhere else, so that
awesome.
Get the exclusive. How did you screw this hand up? So
you won't see this mistake anywhere else.
Yeah, this over here on Tournament Poker Edge. Give you guys a scoop, if you will.
Yeah, so, that's awesome.
Here's a hand that I played from day 2. So on day 2, I started the day with 16,000 chips. So day 1 did not go according to plan at all. But things went pretty well on day 2, and before dinner, I had run it up to 140.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, so things were going great. And the blinds were 1,000, 2,000, and there was a 300 ante. And in the main event, everybody puts in the ante, not just the big blind.
Right.
So there's 5,700 in the pot, and we have 140,000. We're in the small blind, and everyone folds to me. And And so it's just going to be a blind versus blind situation. I have King 10, and my opponent has 105,000. So both of us have, about an average stack, maybe a little bit more. I guess the average around this time would have been about 80,000.
Okay.
So it's folded to me in the small blind, holding King 10 offsuit. And I should tell you a little bit about my opponent before we talk about what I'm supposed to do here. He's been a pretty tough opponent. I had Googled him before the day started. I don't have his name written down here. I'm sorry. But he's from Russia. Typical of most Russian pros, he was very aggressive. He's played probably about 35% of the hand, which is a pretty high VPIP for the main event. Even 9, I think that's pretty high. And he tends to try to seize the moment probably more often than your average opponent in the main event. So I'm not saying he's crazy. He knows what he's doing, but his style is definitely hyper aggressive.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I don't mind trying first here. So Clayton, you get to be the pro here. So even though you're 50%, typically we get beat up by Casey on this podcast. So you can beat us up. We're used to it. So we'll tell you what we do, and we'd love to hear what you actually did or what you think is the right thing. I personally would just call here, and given that how I would lean towards, but especially given the profile, since he's going to probably try to do something with his position and the situation, I'd probably just call here and then call a raise.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I think against a average opponent, or certainly a very tight opponent, I would just raise here. But if we make it like say 5K, I don't know, and he pops it to 15K. Now we're playing this big bloated pot out of position against a tough opponent, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I like limping with the intention of calling a raise pre-flop.
Okay. I can't really beat you guys up too much for that. Oh, that's not what I did. But I think that your play has a lot of merit. What I don't like about it is it's a passive play that kind of forces you to play out of position in what's going to be a somewhat inflated pot probably. You're kind of letting your opponent take the lead in the hand. And I'm not saying you should always fight aggression with aggression, but I think King 10 is good enough to raise or possibly limp 3-bet rather than limp.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an option I didn't think of, and I do like that too. But yeah, I definitely don't. I would never, like, if somebody told me this hand and said, so I raised from the small blind with King 10, I would never be like, well, that's horrible.
Yeah, right.
I think it's pretty standard. And the reason why you guys changed your mind is because of my description of the opponent in his hand. But if you think about what the aggressive opponent is trying to get you to do, aggressive opponents want to neutralize everyone else's aggression level through their own aggression, right? I mean, that's part of the strategy of being the most aggressive player at the table, is that people kind of like tiptoe into pots with you and then play passively against you because they just want to try to control the size of the pot. And that strategy can work, especially if you end up flopping something with which to trap the guy. But I think usually what will happen is if you limp call here, you're going to check fold the flop probably too much.
That's
and
fair.
Then like kind of bleeding a lot of money out of the small blind. So
I think you're right. I think you probably can't. I mean, you probably have to, go further in this. When you limp call, you can't just fold a lot of the flops, right? You're gonna your range is still probably better than his, and which makes it more of a reason for you to have raised pre-flop. But if you do, you can't just, like you said, can't just check fold the majority of the flops. You're probably gonna have to go further. So you're going to be putting more money in anyway. You might as well put it in as the aggressor. Is that kind of the theory?
Yeah. I mean, that's my game theory here is against somebody like this. We know it's probably going to end up being a contested pot. I don't think I'm usually going to be able to raise and take it. I mean, maybe at the bottom of his range, maybe the bottom 20% of his hand, he's just going to let me have this pot. But usually he's going to fight for the pot, either with a call or a 3-bet. So I open expecting to get action, and actually pretty happy if he calls, because I King 10 against his calling range is doing great.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
and then my other plan is that if I raise and get re-raised, I put this hand into my 4-betting range, which I know is probably not considered standard, but I feel like you need to have some hands in your 4-betting range that aren't the nut, right? So I feel like those hands should be the best hands that you would normally fold to a 3-bet are the best hands to 4-bet with, if you will.
That makes sense.
So yeah, so I put King 10 into that category. With King 10 suited, I might have a different strategy, but I think that just having this offsuit King 10 is a good hand for me to occasionally, not every time, but occasionally, especially against a player like this. I'm raising, hoping he 3-bets so that I can take it down with a 4-bet.
Sure.
So, this is like an old school raising war, blind versus blind. So, let's put the gloves on and get in the ring,
I like it.
Yeah.
A lot of the non-European players are just playing more passively pre-flop, assuming they have a post-flop edge, and then wanting to get that edge to work for them after the flop. So they keep the pot kind of smaller before the flop, and you see a lot more calling than you used to, and maybe even 5 years ago it was a lot more 4-betting, 5-betting pre-flop without the nut. But for me, I think when I'm out of position, I think it's profitable to raise and hope that he's 3-bet so that I can 4-bet, which is what happened here. I make it 4,800, and he makes it 10,500, and then I put in 23,000. So we could talk about sizing, but I think these numbers are pretty normal.
Yeah,
you could quibble a little bit, 1,000 here, 500 there.
Right. Yeah, I think
And
that's.
then he shoves on me.
Oh.
For 105,000, and I have to fold my hand.
Yeah.
So, I don't think anyone wants to call.
No, no. I think at that point we give him. He's got the. He beat us.
He wins.
Yeah. And I think that in order to do that, he 5-bet shove. I think in order to do that, he's got a really strong range. Like queen, even queens might be scared to do that. I think he's got aces a lot here. So I think I just ran into a really big one.
You mentioned his image, but by the way, what's your image at this point?
Yeah, that's
so relevant.
To get into it. I think that my image is, well, this guy is just a great player and I don't think that I am a great player. I think I'm a good player, but I think that when you take your stack from 16,000 all the way up to 140, you look like you're the best player in the world.
Right.
And even really good players don't often make the distinction, well, is this guy just getting lucky or is he happen to be playing that well? The truth is I was playing well and getting lucky.
Yeah.
And how I got my stack up to where I did. But all I've done all day is win virtually every pot I enter.
Yeah.
Right. But your confidence probably has to be through the roof for this particular point, and kind of exude it a little bit.
Yeah, I try to keep my emotions under control. Like I try not to let my results affect my confidence too much. But I certainly my table image from the perception that I had, I feel like my opponents were probably not necessarily looking to get involved with me.
Right.
So what hands? Not that we're going to try to give away your entire range, the ranges you play, but you put the King 10 into your 4-betting range. What hand? And we're open raised to hopefully 4-bet. What hands would you just call here with? What kind of range do you just limp basically complete?
Yeah. So I think limp calling. I would like to limp with a lot of really strong hands to 4-bet, or to 3-bet rather. So obviously, like the very top, maybe like aces down to jack, and then that same play with a few other hands just to balance it. Maybe like something like an 8-7 of clubs, maybe like a jack 10 of diamonds would be a good candidate to like limp and then 3-bet, just to balance so that it's not always the nuts when I do that. As far as raise calling, I think that a lot of hands should go into that range. Like I think ace 10 is probably a good candidate to raise call. Maybe like pocket eight, pocket, those middle pocket pairs are probably good for that. Maybe like a suited ace, like an ace five of hearts would be good to kind of raise and then call the three bet. Yeah, so I kind of construct it that way. I like having a king just because a lot of his value range when he makes it 10,000. What did he make it? 10,800. A lot of his range for doing that has a king in it.
Yeah.
When it's a value hand,
Yeah.
so having the block or whatever. But yeah, obviously I didn't block pocket aces, and I think that's probably what my opponent had to put it there.
Yeah, I do like that range of hands that you talked about for limp calling, because they're all very relatively easy hands to play post flop, even though you're out of position. Things like ace five suited, or some small pocket pairs, things like that. Because you're basically you're gonna play your hand pretty flop dependent. So it's maybe even like I was gonna say maybe like king queen suited, but that's probably more of a raise hand for me. But you get the idea. Like I think it's kind of cool to think about which hands to play which way in that exact scenario.
Yeah, definitely, and especially when this scenario could happen again today, and we're fairly deep. It's not like we're playing short stack poker here. I mean, I can four bet fold, so I have chips. Yeah, I think it's important to kind of construct your range that way. And I know a lot of times, like on podcasts, you like to talk about hands that actually went to flop, but I feel like this one was kind of an important hand because it's the first significant pot that I lost that day, and I think that it really did something to my table image, which is one reason I wanted to talk about it, because I think after that it was like, oh, maybe this guy's just been bullying us all day. It kind of raised a lot of doubt.
Right.
How did I go from 16,000 to 140,000 in these 3 or 4 hours we've been playing with him, and now we just on four bet fold. And when you see somebody four bet and then fold, because for so many players the third raise is like always aces and kings. When they see somebody do it without one of those hands, then they definitely notice. So this hand kind of put a spotlight on me, I think, as far as
and I also find it interesting because I think it's representative of a situation that a lot of people have try to from a psychological perspective learn to deal with, is in that you were on this not just from your image perspective, but you were on this run of momentum, right? Going from 16 to 140. And this is the first setback. It sounds like the first bump in the road that you hit along the way, right? How do you, especially in the main event, how do you just are you counting your chips and now you're like, now I have 117, and are you how do you avoid your own momentum swing? And I know you said you try to be level-headed along the way, but we're human. How do you avoid your own sort of inner peace from being disturbed by your momentum being stopped there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, that's a great question, actually. My answer is the only thing I usually try to think about in these spots in tournament situations is, how is what just happened going to affect my opponent? So I kind of take the focus off of myself, and I just think, I think my opponents might be more likely to pay me off now because it looks, I'm a big bluffer. They might think that I'm on tilt, so if I happen to pick up a big hand right away, they might think that I'm trying to win back those chips I just lost to this Russian guy that's kind of been like, the other aggressive player at my table, which really no fun to have the other aggressive pro on your left. And I've been dealing with this guy all day. And this is really the first significant hand. So it looks like, if it's a battle between the two of us that the other 7 players are just observing, it looks like the Russian guy finally landed a really good right hook.
Yeah.
So, and in doing that, it kind of takes my mind off of my own stupid feelings, which are immaterial. So
That's right. That's the thing, right? They're immaterial, and if you had doubled up to 117, you'd be like on cloud 9. Whereas you lose a little bit just from trying something, from playing what in your mind and was likely the best thing to do at that particular moment. I think that's important too, remembering that, you're just trying to make the right decision at every single point. And now your new variables are this stack size and this new situation and information, right? And that's
Yeah.
what keeps, I think it's similar to what you said. That's what keeps me from getting too emotional or too caught up in momentum shifts. Exactly what
Yeah.
you said there.
And, with all the years that I've spent playing not only poker, but other games, I've learned it doesn't serve me in any way to start feeling sad or, just getting frustrated. Like, it just doesn't serve you. So I've gotten probably better than the average player at handling. I mean, I don't even want to use the word tilt, but just, emotional swings as the style that I play involves a lot of chip swings anyway.
Yeah.
So when
Right.
we get on
Okay.
the roller coaster ride, you got to know that you're going to be going up and down a lot. And that's just how it is. Yeah. I mean, my natural playing style is pretty fast, but I'm always changing that style when I realize that my situation doesn't call for. If it doesn't appear to be profitable, I have to be able to change my style. But if you just say, all things being equal, how does Clayton approach the game? I like to put pressure on my opponents and put them to difficult decisions.
Right.
And that involves playing mostly loose aggressive, all things being equal. So when you've done this for as many years as I have, you just, even in the main event, you're not going to say, "Oh, poor me, I just lost."
Yeah. Right.
But with 8% of my stack or whatever, whatever it was, it just didn't really affect me that much. But I realized that for some of my opponents, this would have been considered a catastrophe, and so they're thinking in terms that I think it was a catastrophe, and that I might even be on tilt now.
Right.
So that is useful later. And about 30 minutes after the hand, I did the same thing against another player. I 4-bet, and this time I had the aces, and he jammed with jacks and lost. So, and then afterwards, he told me that he's like, "Well, if I hadn't seen you 4-bet fold before, I probably would have just flatted." He actually said that on his way out the door.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So the image paid off.
Yeah.
Like very, very directly, because it looked like I was doing the thing again.
That's cool.
It's nuts. So, and that's part of running good, is when you have an image and you're aware of it, and then you're actually able to find a perfect spot to exploit it. Like, you need all of those things to happen in order. Like the people that stare at each other for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do, I don't even know what they're looking for, but if they pick something up, they then need to find a spot to use what they picked up, which is another variable that probably won't even happen. So
Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's try. You got one more hand to talk about here before we wrap up?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, let me pick one that actually goes to a flop. Since we just spent 20 minutes on a flop.
Well, you've listened to this podcast before, right? We can go an hour on pre-flop, so it's all good.
It's happened.
Before, I'm a huge fan. Like, I love it. I mean, this is real. This is, for people that are learning the game and picking up the game, this is what poker players do. We have to obsess about all the little decisions, especially ones that come up again and again. Like, you got to know what you're going to do in the spot and construct your ranges and figure this stuff out. But I want to fast forward, if I can, all the way to day 4, because this is a hand I played against the champ, John Sin.
Oh, cool.
Who also ended up at my day 6 table, as I mentioned, but I played with him a little bit on day 4 as well. And the blinds were 4,000, 8,000 with 1,000 ante. So there's 2,100 in the pot. Sorry, 21,000, I mean to say, in the pot. We have 1.5 million. So we're doing great. The average was only about 800,000 at this point.
Wow, you had 200 big blinds at this point. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we're great. We have a huge stack. There are 420 players left, and we are in 25th place-ish. So we're one of the top 30 stacks in the tournament. It's a really fun table. People are telling jokes. They found out I'm a comedian, and people are telling me jokes, like golf jokes and ex-wife jokes and all kinds of, like, jokey jokes, like from a joke book or an email, which is fun. Like, I like when people do that because it kind of gets things loosened up. And, I like to have fun when I'm playing poker. It's not always about, like, trying to make people laugh so that I can get a read on them. It's just
Right.
I'd rather laugh than not laugh. You know,
Yeah.
some kind of sinister strategy thing. It's just let's have some
Yeah.
fun. We're playing a card game, you know.
Right.
So anyway, Johnson on my right, he has about 550,000. So his stack is a little below average, but you know it's the main event, so he's not desperate or anything.
Yeah.
He opens to 18,000, which is kind of the standard at the table, and he's in the cutoff. And I had pocket nines on the button. Now the small blind is a woman from Malaysia who's been like on lockdown, like super tight. And the big blind is, I think he's probably like a doctor or something. He's actually been reading the newspaper. He's an older guy. He's been like reading the newspaper in between hands, which is kind of unusual nowadays to even see a newspaper. This guy brought one.
Yeah. Deep in the main event. Doesn't even pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, the money, by the way. We're in the money at this point. So, but yeah, he was kind of hanging out. He was telling me jokes, and he was just having a grand old time. I have a feeling it's kind of like a bucket list thing for him. So yeah, it's on me on the button with pocket nine.
Eric, you can go first on this one.
Sin was immediately to your right?
Yeah. So he's in the cutoff, and I have the button.
Yeah. So I think I like I like a 3-bet here. Probably make it like 42 or something like that. You said he made it 18, right? So yeah, something somewhere around that range. I mean, I think our hands. I can kind of get behind a flat sometimes too, but I don't know if I really want to go like multi-way with my nines because we're not just playing it for set value. So yeah, I think I 3-bet here.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I probably would say similar. I think, I don't think you can go wrong with anything other than folding, right? But I think I would probably 3-bet for the same reasons. Given the situation, your range is strong against him. You'll be in position. Why not play a profitable spot for a higher rate? In when it's presented to you.
I think I flat this a decent amount against an early position open.
Yeah, it's a different story.
But I just think against the cutoff open, like, especially if we know that this guy is competent, like he's opening pretty wide here, especially because of who's in the big blind. I mean,
did you know?
Not to do the old stereotype thing, but
Did you know he was going to win? No, that's not the question I was
in
going to ask.
In that case, fold.
Did you? My real question was, did you know that this was the guy who finished 11 2 years ago? Like, what is your read on him, by the way?
My read on him was that he was a good player. He hadn't been extremely aggressive. I think a lot of players, like even professional players, they take a very low variance approach to the main event. And maybe in some cases to the detriment of their win rate. They would rather sacrifice a little bit of win rate just for the sake of having a better chance of surviving longer. He struck me as that type. Like he'd been here. I wasn't aware that he'd been here before, but it wouldn't have surprised me had you said, hey, by the way, that guy to your right finished in the top 20 last year. Like, that wouldn't have surprised me because he just seemed like he was competent. He wasn't really getting out of line, and I thought that he kind of knew what he was doing. I guess my question before I tell you guys what I do is, what's the plan if we 3-bet and there's more raising?
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, what is your image at this point? You have a huge stack. I mean, how'd you get it? Do they see you get it?
Yeah.
What's your image here?
Yeah, so I got most of this stack at the other table. I've been at this table for about an hour, and somebody recognized me. Aren't you that comedian? Whatever. And then we were kind of like, the image was, there's a fun-loving comedian at my table that hasn't really been making that much noise, but he showed up with a lot of chips.
Right.
So I don't think I held like a table captain kind of image at all. If anything, I was like a friendly, fun-loving guy that was just sitting down with a lot of chips and laughing it off.
Yeah. I think to your question, I based on what you've said about him, like he's hasn't been getting out of line. He hasn't. You perceive him as the kind of guy who's not going to try to like play giant, huge, big bloated pots, et cetera, et cetera. Like I kind of think that makes the three bet even cooler because if he four bets, we could probably fairly comfortably fold.
Right. And then what
Um,
you lose when you do that is you don't get the chance to hit a set,
True.
right? So that's what you lose with that strategy. But what you gain with that strategy is you're probably going to get a lot of raise and take it. If you three
Yep.
bet and John's like, well, okay, I tried for this one. Now
Yeah.
this guy hasn't been that crazy. It's like now taking over. So I'll just
Yeah.
let him have and make a note of it or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair trade-off, and I think that's a good play. I agree that there's no real harm in calling or raising here. I
Yeah.
think both are okay. I think folding would have been a mistake. Um,
I guess one benefit to maybe flatting, just to look at an alternative perspective, is that based on the small blind and the big blind, the guy reading the newspaper maybe isn't as up on the idea of defending your big blind as much as you should be.
oh no, yeah,
Especially getting this amazing price. So
yeah,
maybe my initial thought of raising so that we don't have to play like a three or a four-way pot might not be as relevant because we're probably not going to be playing a three or four-way pot as often with these two particular people in the blind. Like if it's some euro in the big blind, he's going to call every time that you call.
every time because he's totally priced in. But yeah, this
Yeah,
guy doesn't know that he's priced in.
right.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm not as I could see a flat being a little cooler in this spot, but I think I'm still just my default here would be to raise, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
probably my default too. But I think that it's good to maintain a couple of non-default plays here and there. And
Sure.
in this
Yep.
particular case, I did choose to just call. I wanted to play on my button. I wanted to, just play the rest of the hand in position, keep the pot at a reasonable stack to pot ratio against my opponent's effective stack, and just see what happens. And I really don't mind if these other players get involved. I mean,
Yeah.
if the flop's really bad for me or there's a lot of action after the flop, I can just fold nines. It's not that good a hand. I don't care that much about nine.
Yep.
I don't feel like I need to cry if I end up getting outplayed with my nines. Even it's not the end
Yeah.
of the world.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I just called this time, but I definitely see the value in three betting it. My three betting range is pretty wide here. It's a lot of suited aces. It's any pair higher than nines, and sometimes nines as well. Sometimes eight, and then obviously like the ace 10 plus. I think it's a good three betting range. Probably king queen to three bet. So there are a lot of three betting hands, but then I need to balance
Yeah.
my call hands. All the pairs are calling. A lot of suited connectors are calling. Jack 10's calling, like those kind of hands where I just want to defend my button,
Hmm.
if you
Yep.
will. So yeah, the big blind also calls. The three of us see the flop. And the flop is 8-6 tray with two spades. So it's an 8-6 tray with the six tray of spades, eight of hearts. So we have an overpair. The big blind checks and John bet 26K into, I should have done this math before, but it's 22,000 plus 36,000 plus 10,000, whatever that is. So it's a really small bet.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's here.
Well, I certainly don't think we can fold.
Right.
But I also don't think I'm in love with raising. But I kind of hate raising. So I think I'm just gonna call here.
Yeah. I mean, I do this. I do the same thing. And if it's a leak when we've identified one, yeah. Although I just hate, when you get paint on the turn or the river, right? Then you're kicking yourself for not doing something. But I do think that, I'm not folding a turn if an ace or king comes, right? So I'm just gonna just call here and just see what happens if anything bigger comes out.
Yeah. If you think about the hand from John's perspective, suppose he has something that beats us, like pocket jacks, right? This is a pretty draw heavy flop. 8-6-3,
Yeah.
probably the big blind has a range advantage. There are a lot of draws that are possible. gut shots, flush draws. There's a lot out there that he should be worried about. And so for that reason, I think that his bet is too small no matter what he has.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, I found that interesting. I'm still trying to do the math. I'm not good at doing this kind of math in my head, but I think that he's betting 26 into something like 60.
Yeah, it's like 60, 64, 65, something like that.
Yeah. So that's a pretty small bet for the situation.
Yeah.
And I agree that raising is bad because I can't get called by worst, and I'm always getting called by better. So
Yeah.
I just call, and the big blind folds. So now I got what I wanted. I'm heads up in position with the overpair. And I think that my hand is probably good at that point
Yeah.
because of the size of his flop bet.
Mhm.
And maybe I put too much stock into people's sizing, but I definitely think that most players reveal a lot through their bet sizing. People aren't good yet at balancing their bet sizing, in that
Yeah,
way.
I mean, I read the bet size as like, all right, if these guys have like King Jack and 10 Queen, they're just gonna fold here. Then he's stabbing at it for that. I know it's very draw heavy, but that seems to me with that small size is it's one of those things where it's like any it's that size where any size gets
The
where
same
where it
result.
will be the same result. Yeah, it's exactly
Yeah.
what I was going to say, Derek. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it doesn't matter the size, just a bet gets if your opponents have the right hands, they will fold to 15K as,
Right.
as they will fold to 50K, right? So 26 is fine in that case, and he doesn't put more in the other case, which gives me the indication that he probably doesn't have much.
Right. So it felt like not much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said as far as reading that size. And yeah, like if I have Queen Jack and the big blind has like Ace 4,
Yeah.
then we're both folding for 26. But
Yeah.
since now announced that I have something, I'm not expecting him to continue very often.
Yeah.
So the turn is the deuce of diamond. So no flush yet, but the 5-4 got there.
Mm-hmm.
And now he bets 35 into 120 or whatever.
Wow. So weird. This is where I'm really happy that I have 1.5 million, so that I can call here again and not feel too terrible about it. when I
Yeah.
find out that he like has 4 or 5 or he has a set of eights or something.
Right.
But I mean, I just think we're just getting too good of a price. He could be kind of doing this weird like sort of small betting thing too, trying to like get. I mean, he could have spades. So he's just trying to like, not check to you so that you bet, 58K or something and get him to, make him fold his flush draw or something. But
Yeah, we used to call that a defensive bet. Or
yeah,
blocking bet, like where you bet smaller than what you're willing to call.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
fine. That's a possible explanation for what's going on here. I was honestly very surprised that he bet again, and even more surprised at how small he bet. Like, what the heck hand is doing this? Yeah, so I found it odd to say the least. But I had to call him. I mean, I don't see any other play not getting that price. And if he's just, if he's owning me with jacks, then he's really good. Good for him.
Yep.
And I'm not raising here because I don't see what the point. I sure I'm missing. I could be missing something, but the raise, it feels like if I raise, you're only just getting worse hands to fold, and you might be inviting a draw to do something here which you don't want to do. But is there any justification for raising it? Would you ever consider it or?
Yeah, I mean, if Eric's right, and he could have a flush draw a lot, then raising is good just because it charges the flush draw, a much larger. But like if you think your opponent is betting small because he doesn't want you to bet big, then raising is usually a great play.
Yeah.
But if I had a strong read that that's what was going on here, then I probably would have raised because I like to figure out what my opponents want me to do and then disappoint them wherever possible.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but I wasn't that sure. I did consider that as a possible explanation for this tiny bet, but I wasn't sure enough to commit to the play, so I just called
Fair
and
enough.
said, you know what, if he's bluffing me with a spade, then he can, he probably has to bluff again on the river if it doesn't come in. So I have a good bluff catcher. I think nines are a really good bluff catcher
Hmm.
situation, but they're not a good value raise. If I'm raising, it's definitely not for value. I think I can maybe get called by an eight. Like if he has something like ace eight, then
Right.
I can for value, right? He has to pay off with that. But other than that, I can't really think of too many hands that I'm beating when I'm called.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think you explained that exactly what I was trying to say there. So
oh, cool, good,
yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah.
The river's is six of diamonds. So we pair the board. The final board is 8, 6, trade, deuce, 6, and there's no flush. So I think it's a great card for me.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe he has 3 sixes now, but I'm willing to fade that possibility. And I'm ready to call another small bet. Um, the pot is now something like 190, and my opponent bets 120,
Wow.
which is not expected at all
Yeah.
at this moment. So I don't tank very often, and in fact, I kind of got famous this summer for calling the clock on people because I hate slow poker, but I definitely took my time in making this decision.
Yeah, this is a really weird spot.
And this is where I don't think enough. So I think it's to your credit that you did tank, because I kind of made my decision on the turn. Already thinking ahead of a card like this, and maybe once again, I should stop and think a little bit more. But I mean, I'm just calling here. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's bad, but I never even will consider folding.
It,
And yeah. So I don't know. Curious
it's
what happened.
it's weird because I think this is where we have to really try to think about what those small raises, or sorry, small bets meant. Because if he was on a spade draw and he was making, as we called them, defensive bets or blocking bets, then he might think to himself, well, I didn't hit my spade, but now my only chance
Yeah,
to win this hand is to bomb this river.
yeah. And
And
that's what I'm
and
thinking.
yeah,
That's what I'm thinking. Why I mean, I didn't say that. I should. Maybe it's my instinct that feels that. But you explained why I'm almost instantly calling. But continue with
yeah. And
your
I was
point.
gonna say, if um, he also can think, well, my opponent can have missed spades here a bunch, so I can take this down with a bunch of ace high type hands,
Yeah.
so etc.
Yep.
But he could, but when we call and he flips over eights, we're like, oh well, that makes perfect sense too. Like the missed draws or the trying to get us off a missed draw both make sense, but so does like a full house or quads or you know. But that being said, I
No, it
think
doesn't
our
bother
hand,
me.
I think our
It
hand
doesn't
is
bother
under.
me if he has that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I was gonna say, I think our hand is under repped, and I think we have. I think we just have. We're gonna win the pot enough here. I think when we call to make a call. So
Right?
I'm gonna
And is it
call, but
okay?
I'm also really bad at making big folds. So
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Good to know if I you. Uh,
yeah, don't bluff me
um,
because I hate to fold.
Yeah.
that's a good image to have. So he's put in 40% of his stack at this point.
Yeah.
Does that affect anybody's thinking at all? Does that change how easy this call is?
Not, not really. I mean, it's hard because I know the guy's name and I know he's
Yeah.
I know he's a good player, but if I feel like the guy has been playing solid and feels like a pro, I think, that's, I think I'm going to give him credit for being able to do that against me, who has played very passively in this hand.
Yeah.
I just, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we had raised at some point in this pot, or we were the aggressor, I think it becomes a much different hand. But we've just played so passively that it just looks like a draw that we had, or a pretty weak, like we might have ace eight or ace six that he thinks he can get to fold. So I think just based on the way we played our hand, we almost, I don't want to say we have to call because we never have to do anything, but
Yeah. I
we might
definitely
have to
wasn't
call.
expecting this huge bet after he made these smaller bets. Now, I mean, I know this bet is only about 65% of the pot. So, but in that sense, it's not a huge bet. But compared to the percentage of the pot that he was betting on all other streets, it's a really big bet.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as easy a call for me as it seems to be for you guys. But I did eventually make the call, and he threw his hand in the muck. So
Wow.
that was a good one, because that pot took me to almost $2 million.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And it's a good feeling to, like, be at that point. I had a top 10 chip stack late on day 4 of the main event, which is makes it really hard to sleep when you.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you. I mean, after that, how do you? What does it feel like going to bed with the big stack in day 4 or 5 of the main event?
And I've done it a few times now. But really, an any bracelet event, like go to bed as chip leader, whatever. How many players you look at, who you're going to play against the next day. You look at the stacks other people have at your table, and it's just so hard to shut down. Like, that's one of the hardest things for me, is kind of at the end of a 12-hour day of poker, just turning it off and going to bed, and like just resting my brain that's been working so hard for so long all day, to just be able to turn it off. That is something that I struggle with, and I hardly got any sleep. I was getting 4 or 5 hours a night throughout the main event, just because I love it so much, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait for the next day so I could play some more, and just it's really hard to just like wind down. And I understand why certain players use certain substances to help them out.
Right.
Both to get to sleep and to wake up.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Nice.
but yeah, those are kind of two of the hands that I hadn't talked about anywhere else that I wanted to run past you guys. I was kind of surprised that he bet so much, but I guess, in the old days, we used to say, well, when you're bluffing, you're trying to buy something. And when you're trying to buy something, you want to try to get it as cheaply as possible.
Yeah.
Mm.
When you're value betting, you're trying to sell something. This is from system. I didn't make this stuff up. But, when you're value betting, you're trying to sell something, so you want to sell it for as high a price as possible. Yeah. So when I first started playing No Limit Hold'em, 10 or 12 years ago, you would find big bets were usually value and small bets were usually bluffs. But I think, especially good players, like, they've just learned to balance that sizing. My best guess is that he missed his spade, and so then he knew the only way he could win the pot was to bomb it on a river.
Yeah.
And
I'd be way more scared of that bet if you guys had a history and he knew more about how you play, because then that 120 has a lot more thinking behind it, right? And a lot more nuance and a lot more targeted towards you and how you play. I'd be much more worried about it if he had history with you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
Well, cool. Awesome. I know you have a dinner to get to, so I want to let you go. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with us, and I enjoyed it a lot. Hopefully, maybe we can do it again sometime. Maybe next year after you win the main event.
Yeah. Gonna have to.
He's
gonna have to beat me.
Oh yeah. Okay. We'll go heads up. You and me. Heads up.
All right. Do it.
Thanks, guys.
Right. Cool.
All right,
Thanks, Clayton.
Pleasure meeting you, man. Continue good luck, and I'm in New York, so I plan on coming to see you. Anything you want to plug? I know you mentioned the Poker Central stuff. Any shows or anything? Your website. Anything you want people to go check out?
Yeah, definitely. Twitter and Instagram at Clayton Comic. Anybody who's coming to New York and wants to see some stand up, you can go to theclaytonfletchershow.com and get tickets to see me. I'm usually there on Friday nights. I have my own show. I headline. I have some of the best comics in New York perform along with me, and I know a lot of poker players like stand-up comedy, so it's always fun when people show up in the crowd and say, "Hey, I played with you at Borgata," or
that's great.
I always get a kick out of that when people from the poker world converge in my little comedy world. So yeah, just hit me up at Clayton Comic, and love to hear from some of you guys.
Awesome.
I'll keep an eye.
Great meeting you, Clayton.
Yeah, and I'll keep an eye on you on the road. Maybe I'll catch you somewhere in the country at some point. That'd be fun. Cool. Well, thanks to Clayton Fletcher. You can follow him, like he said, on Instagram and Twitter at Clayton Comic. And Diego, good to talk to you again, my friend. For everybody out there who is a TP member, make sure you go check out all the new videos that have come out. We got new stuff from we have a video series with me getting ripped on by Mike Alioto, and that's really all you need to know. So because we know you guys
Always
love
my
that.
favorite.
So yeah, so go check that out.
It's my favorite, and we also have a classic Big Dog Sunday Million live sweat. We're
nice.
going old school.
That's right. I need to watch that one. I'm behind on my
Yeah.
vids. So I'll get to that soon. Cool. So that's it for now. We are back. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast.
See ya.
Like they do in Texas plays. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Carry mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Carry mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, it's not rough, it isn't fun.